The coffee hit my chest before I saw the mug leave his hand. A searing splash soaked through my blouse, the heat clawing at my skin. And for a second, I thought time stopped. The boardroom fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the rhythmic drip of coffee hitting the polished oak table. I didn't flinch. My fingers twitched, but my face stayed still. 12 executives sat frozen around me, some with mouths slightly open, none with the courage to move. David Monroe, CEO of Stratton Energies, leaned in so close, I could smell the bitterness of his drink on his breath. His voice shook with rage as he snapped that I was nothing but a useless assistant. Behind him, no one dared speak, not even the ones who had told me privately how tired they were of his temper. I could feel the coffee cooling now, sticking to the fabric on my skin. Pain radiated from the burn, but I was too focused to care. My heartbeat was steady, anchored by the moment I had rehearsed over and over in my mind.
My name is Zoe Campbell. I'm 34, I hold degrees in environmental engineering and business strategy, and for the past 3 years, I worked as David Monroe's executive assistant. That title, though, never told the full story. Every insult, every lie, every time he stole someone else's credit or silenced an employee in front of others, I documented it, discreetly, methodically, and legally. I waited not because I was afraid, but because timing was everything. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and unlocked the screen. For a beat, I looked him directly in the eye, his face red with fury, still unaware that his world was about to collapse. I held up the phone without a word, letting the moment settle like a trap springing shut. Everyone here should know something. I said, my voice calm and low, but unmistakably clear. For the past 2 years, I've been recording every meeting I've attended in this room, including this one. The silence that followed felt heavier than the coffee on my blouse. David's face drained of color. His jaw clenched, but no words came out. Around the table, eyes darted between him and me like people trying to gauge which direction the earthquake would hit next. I turned slightly, addressing the full room now. I said nothing for a moment, just let them sit with what I had just revealed. That's when I noticed something shifting, not just fear, but curiosity. For the first time, they weren't looking through me. They were actually listening. I want to be very clear. This isn't a threat, and it's not blackmail. It's a reckoning. I stepped away from my chair, slowly giving the weight of the moment space to breathe. I know what this company's been hiding. I know what he's been doing behind closed doors, and now, so will all of you. I took another breath and looked straight at the chairman. Before I say anything else, I suggest someone get a first aid kit. Then I'll explain how I've spent the last 18 months building something that's about to change your future and his forever. This wasn't about revenge, it was about the truth. And the truth was about to speak louder than any title ever could. I joined Stratton Energies 4 years ago, fresh off a contract with a smaller green tech firm that had gone under during a merger. At the time, I needed stability, something steady, while I figured out my next move. I never imagined I'd end up as the assistant to one of the most volatile executives in the industry. David Monroe didn't hire me because I stood out. He hired me because I didn't. To him, I was just organized, efficient, and willing to nod when spoken to. That's exactly what I wanted him to think. I knew from day one that being underestimated was my best asset. It made me invisible, and invisibility gave me freedom. In meetings, I took notes that no one ever read, but that I filed religiously. I managed David's calendar, proofed his emails, handled his travel, and fielded his tantrums. I also memorized every client name, every internal project, and every single time he rewrote someone else's work to claim it as his own. The more he dismissed me, the more I learned. I saw which teams were overworked, which clients were unhappy, and how deals were made behind closed doors without compliance oversight. I watched him manipulate data in presentations and silence dissent by replacing key staff with loyal followers. Every time he interrupted me, talked over me, or made a snide comment about my role, I stored it like kindling. He never once asked me what I actually studied, or where I saw myself in 5 years. In his eyes, I was an extra chair in the room, useful only when he needed someone to blame. What he didn't realize was that I already had my MBA along with a degree in sustainable engineering. I'd worked in 3 startups and consulted for one clean energy accelerator. I had insights into our product pipeline that even the R&D head didn't have because I handled their reports and feedback forms. I wasn't biding my time out of fear. I was observing, archiving, and preparing. While he focused on controlling the narrative, I was mapping the system from the inside. By year 2, I knew who I wanted on my team, what our competitors lacked, and which 3 clients would likely jump ship if given a better offer. I spent evenings refining a business plan while my job paid the bills. It wasn't glamorous, but it was strategic. David believed control came from being loud, visible, and feared. I knew better. Real control comes from knowing everything before anyone else realizes you've been watching. So I kept smiling, kept organizing his chaos, and let him believe he was untouchable. Because I knew one day all the pieces would align. And when they did, no one would see me coming. Not even him. It started with a message I never expected to send. I reached out to Lena Torres Stratton's former head of finance, who had quietly resigned 6 months after clashing with David about budget manipulation. I told her I needed insight for a theoretical case study, but she saw through the excuse before I even finished my second sentence. We met at a quiet cafe near the river. I brought a printed outline of a business plan I'd been shaping for nearly a year, something built on principles I believed our industry had forgotten. Lena read it twice before looking up and asking when we would start. She wasn't the only one who felt discarded. Over the next few weeks, I tracked down others who had either walked away from Stratton or been forced out. Engineers, analysts, and product leads. All of them are brilliant. All of them were burned by David's ego. One by one, they listened. Some were skeptical, others cautiously intrigued. But every single person had something in common: they weren't done building something meaningful. They just hadn't had the chance to do it on their own terms. We called it Project Nova, a name that felt like a rebirth. A company that would rise not in defiance of Stratton, but in pursuit of a future that the firm had refused to see. Clean energy, user-first innovation, and a collaborative culture where good ideas weren't buried under hierarchy. By day, I was still the loyal assistant. I brought coffee, scheduled meetings, and kept my head down. But by night, I ran strategy calls, coordinated legal filings, and mapped out a phased product launch timeline. The duality wasn't easy. I kept 2 phones, encrypted all communications, and ran payroll through a third-party firm so no names would trace back to me. It was exhausting, but it was also the most alive I had felt in years. The risk was constant. If David had discovered even one piece of what I was doing, I would have been fired, blacklisted, and possibly sued. But I also knew that the longer I played my role, the stronger our foundation would become. Every insult he threw at me in the office became fuel. Every late night and early morning was proof that we were getting closer. The people he pushed away were now helping me build something far more powerful than he ever imagined. We didn't need revenge. We needed vision, courage, and trust in each other. And that's exactly what we had. Project Nova wasn't just a startup, it was a promise, and I had no intention of breaking it. David didn't even look up from his laptop when he handed me the badge. He just told me to collect handouts, listen in on competitor panels, and bring back a summary he could skim. To him, the annual Energy Innovation Conference was beneath his attention that year, especially since it overlapped with his son's graduation. I boarded the flight alone, wearing my assistant label like armor. But tucked in my bag beneath Stratton's branded folder was a different agenda, one that would change everything before the weekend was over. The first meeting was with Clarissa Hahn, Procurement Director for North Point Utilities. Stratton had supplied them for 6 years, but their last 2 renewal meetings had been bumpy. I approached her during a networking session, and when she realized I wasn't there just to chit-chat, her tone shifted. She asked if David had approved our conversation. I told her I was gathering intelligence that might help both of us. Then I slid a slim folder across the table, outlining Nova's modular energy system client-first approach and implementation model. Her brows lifted. She read silently for 5 minutes, then asked a single question. "If this works, why are you still there?" "Because I'm not finished yet," I said. "But I'm close." By the time our coffee cooled, I had her tentative interest. Not a commitment, but a promise to have a deeper meeting in 2 weeks.
It was more than I'd hoped for. Next was Reyes Global Stratton's second largest partner and notoriously hard to reach. I caught their VP Dale during a post-panel lunch. He was blunt skeptical and 3 bites into a sandwich when I started my pitch. But he listened. When I brought up Stratton's failure to upgrade their battery tech despite internal reports flagging faults, he blinked twice. I handed him a spec comparison sheet and said nothing. He asked who had designed Nova's prototypes. I said the same engineer Stratton drove out last year. Dale laughed and said that it finally explained where Rajan had disappeared to. The final meeting was the biggest gamble. Halverson Dynamics accounted for nearly a quarter of Stratton's yearly contracts. Their CEO Mary was booked solid, but I managed 10 minutes on the walk between her panel and a private luncheon. I kept it simple. Told her I knew Stratton was bleeding value. Offered a bridge to something smarter, leaner, and designed for the decade ahead. She didn't respond right away, just asked if I had numbers to back it up. I handed her a flash drive and thanked her for her time. 2 hours later, she emailed me from her hotel room, asking for a late-night call. We spoke for 45 minutes. She didn't say yes, but she didn't hang up either. By the end of that weekend, I'd spoken to decision-makers representing over half of Stratton's client base. Some gave polite declines, others gave questions that meant maybe. But 3 gave me the one thing I needed most: a window. When I returned to the office, David asked how the coffee had been and if I had remembered to collect tote bags. I smiled and told him the conference had been enlightening. He laughed. Then he tossed my typed notes aside like they meant nothing. That moment right there was all the confirmation I needed. He had no idea what I had just done. But he would. Very soon. David was still standing when I turned to the board, his hand hovering near the empty coffee mug, like he didn't quite believe what had just happened. I looked at the 12 men and women who had watched him explode, their expressions a blend of discomfort and curiosity. No one reached for the intercom or called for security. I took a breath, glanced at the dark stain spreading across my blouse, and then began. I'm not here to ask for an apology. I'm here to offer a solution. The silence was electric. I introduced myself properly by name and by title, founder and CEO of Nova Energy Systems. Our core team consisted of their former lead engineer, their most respected financial strategist, and 6 others they had once trusted until David pushed them out. David's face turned a blotchy red. He shouted that this was betrayal, corporate theft, delusion. His voice echoed desperate and cracking under its own weight. I held up a flash drive and placed it on the table. Inside were letters of intent from 3 of their largest clients' transition models and a valuation projection that showed exactly how Stratton would collapse within 6 months if the deals went public. The chairman finally spoke. He asked what I wanted. I looked him straight in the eye and told him I wasn't interested in a war. I was offering a merger with terms that would save the company, protect jobs, and restore integrity. David lunged forward, calling it extortion, yelling that no one would follow someone like me. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked around the table and said they already had. One by one, the board members shifted their gaze to me, not with fear, but with realization. The room that had once made me invisible now saw me completely. I picked up my bag and walked to the door. You have until tomorrow morning. Accept the terms or face a public launch and mass client exodus. Either way, I said Nova wins. Behind me, David's voice cracked in rage, but no one stopped me. No one called my name. I didn't slam the door. I didn't need to. The message was already thunderous. I walked back into the Stratton building less than 48 hours after the board meeting, but nothing about it felt the same. The receptionist looked up with wide eyes, her gaze darting to the others behind her, whispering fast and low. I didn't need an announcement. My presence carried its own gravity now. The walls still had the same art, the same corporate gray carpet, the same recycled air. But I wasn't here to fetch coffee or take notes anymore. This time, I was here to sign the papers that made me their new CEO. I passed by familiar faces, people who once handed me forms without looking, who now stood frozen in doorways. Some offered tentative nods. Others looked away, unsure of what came next. At the boardroom door, Harold, the chairman, greeted me with a pen already uncapped. He didn't apologize. He didn't need to. The silence in the room when I sat at the head of the table was louder than anything he could have said. We signed the merger. Nova acquired Stratton. The company would operate as a subsidiary under a phased integration model. I insisted on retention reviews for staff, not purges. When it ended, I didn't celebrate. I stood, thanked them, and asked for 5 minutes alone in the room. As the door closed, I looked at the table where I had once been humiliated. Same wood, same chairs. But this time, I was standing tall. I made it a point to meet with every department in the following days. I shook hands with interns and had real conversations with engineers. I asked questions, listened carefully, and made no promises I couldn't keep. I could have walked in and cleaned house, but revenge was never the goal. I wanted to build a place where no one would ever feel the way I had felt, silenced, ignored, expendable. Leadership isn't about replacing one name with another. It's about changing the culture, the expectations, the future. And that's what I came here to do. Not to remind them who I was, but to show them who we all could become. 3 months after the acquisition, news broke that David Monroe had launched his own energy startup. He called it Apex Core, and the press release claimed it would revolutionize sustainable tech by returning to bold leadership and classic values. To anyone paying attention, it was a veiled swipe at me and everything Nova stood for. He tried to poach engineers, some of whom had worked under him before. He offered bonuses, titles, and promises. Not a single one left. I didn't need to persuade them. They remembered. My team knew what collaboration felt like now. What it meant to be heard, valued, and challenged for the right reasons. No amount of money could recreate that. David's strategy was old. He focused on headlines and intimidation. We focused on people and the product. Within weeks, client rumors started swirling about Apex Core's disorganization and lack of clarity. One morning, I received a message from one of his funders. They were pulling out. They'd done their research, talked to former Stratton clients, and had serious doubts about his leadership credibility. I thanked them for their candor and moved on. I didn't take joy in his failure. I didn't gloat or issue a public statement. I had bigger things to build. And frankly, I had already won the only battle that mattered. David thought power came from control. I learned that real power comes from trust. The kind that takes time to earn and seconds to lose. When someone asked me if I'd ever respond to his public jabs, I smiled and said no. He was still trying to win a game I no longer played. Nova was never about him. It was about what we could create in spite of him. And that was the real victory. Not taking something away, but creating something better. Something that would outlast every headline, every insult, and every man who once told me to keep quiet. The room was quiet as I stepped up to the podium. Cameras clicked softly, a few murmurs in the back, but mostly there was stillness. The kind that comes just before something that matters. I looked out at the faces in the crowd, industry leaders, investors, and students, and scattered among them the people who had walked beside me when no one else saw what we were building. My team, my partners, my friends. The plaque in my hand read, Innovator of the Year. It was heavy in all the right ways. I held it for a moment longer before I spoke. Then I set it down and let my voice do the rest. There was a time when I sat at the edge of conference tables scribbling notes. No one read. I was there early, stayed late, never missed a detail. But no one looked me in the eye when they talked about the future. Because they didn't think I'd be part of it. I know what it feels like to be overlooked. To be told that your role is small, your value is limited, and your presence is background. I know what it feels like to carry more than you're given credit for, but I also know the strength in that silence. I learned to listen more deeply than anyone else in the room. I learned how systems worked, where they broke, and how people hid behind titles when they lacked courage. For years, I was underestimated, and that turned out to be my greatest advantage. Because while they ignored me, I prepared. While they doubted me, I built. What we've accomplished with Nova wasn't fueled by anger. It was built with intention, with collaboration, with a belief that leadership doesn't require shouting. Sometimes the strongest leaders are the ones who were never invited to speak, but chose to anyway. This award doesn't just belong to me.
It belongs to everyone who's ever been told to stay quiet.
To those who waited their turn, not out of fear, but out of patience. Who did the work without applause, knowing one day the work would speak for itself? If you're sitting in a role that feels invisible, if your ideas keep getting talked over, or if your name never makes it into the credits, I want you to hear me. You are not powerless. You are not small. Being unseen is not the same as being unworthy, and your voice, when you choose to use it, can change everything. So don't wait for permission. Don't wait for someone to give you a title to start leading. Just start, because someday, someone will look at you and say they never saw it coming, and you'll smile knowing that was the plan all along.